Snow fell in heavy white sheets, covering the metal streets of the human colony. The air was so cold it burned the lungs with every breath. Lights from the tall buildings glowed faintly through the fog of ice, but none of them offered warmth. To her, Rana walked slowly, her alien feet wrapped in torn cloth, each step sinking into the snow. Her thin, tattered cloak clung to her body. Soaked from the melting frost, the cold had teeth, and it bit into her skin without mercy. She kept her eyes down, afraid to meet the stares of the people rushing past. Some looked at her with pity, others with disgust, but no one stopped. No one wanted to give shelter to a widow from another world. Her breathing grew heavier, each step harder than the last. She clutched a small, glowing pendant around her neck, the only thing she had left from her husband. The tiny light inside it flickered like a dying star. The streets were lined with shops and food stalls, but their doors slammed shut as she passed. A human woman at a bakery closed the window quickly. Muttering under her breath, an alien vendor shook his head and turned away. Pretending he hadn't seen her, Rena's stomach growled, but she ignored it. Food was useless if she froze to death first. She needed warmth, just one room, one fire, but every home here had its doors closed. She remembered her husband's voice, deep and warm, telling her, "No matter where you are, find the light." But the only light she saw now came from the cold, distant lamps. She turned into a narrow alley. Hoping to block some of the wind, the walls dripped with frozen water, ice climbing up the bricks. Like crystal vines at the end of the alley, she spotted a power vent. Steam hissing out into the cold. She stumbled toward it, feeling the faint heat kiss her frozen skin. Rana crouched near the vent, curling into herself. Her legs shook so badly she couldn't stop them. Her hands were stiff, the skin pale and cracked. If she stayed still, maybe she could keep her body from freezing completely. The sound of snow crunching under boots made her tense. She pressed her back against the wall, hiding her pendant under her cloak. A shadow stretched across the alley, tall and solid. The figure moved closer, the boots heavy on the snow. Rena's heart raced. She had seen what happened when desperate people found someone weaker than them. Some would rob her, others might drag her into the darkness. She forced her voice to sound steady. "I have nothing worth taking," she said. The figure stopped, then crouched down in front of her. It was a human man, his face partly hidden by a thick scarf. Frost clung to his dark hair, and his coat was heavy and worn. His eyes studied her for a moment, calm but sharp. "You'll freeze to death here," he said, his voice low. Rana looked away. "Better here than where I came from," she whispered. The man didn't reply immediately. Instead, he shrugged off his coat. She stared at him in disbelief as he held it out to her. Humans didn't give without expecting something in return. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Still, her body ached for warmth, and the steam from the vent wasn't enough. Her frozen fingers reached out slowly. Touching the heavy fabric, it was warm, smelling faintly of oil and smoke. "Put it on," he said firmly. She hesitated, then slid her arms into the coat. The warmth hit her like a wave. Almost painful after the cold, she felt her chest tighten. Not from fear, but from the strange kindness in his gesture. He stood and extended a hand. "There's heat inside my workshop, and hot tea." Her mind screamed to refuse. This was how traps started, but her legs felt too weak to stand on their own. Slowly, she took his hand. The human pulled her gently to her feet. The snow fell harder now, wind pushing at them from every side. He didn't speak as he led her out of the alley, only kept his arm around her to block the cold. The streets seemed quieter now, the few people outside staring as they passed. To them, she was still just a widow, just an unwanted alien yet. This human walked with her like she belonged beside him. They stopped outside a small, rusted workshop. the windows glowing with soft light. The sign above the door was worn, half the letters faded. He opened the door, and the rush of warm air almost made her dizzy. The smell of metal, wood, and something cooking filled her senses. She stood in the doorway, unsure if she should step. Inside, the man turned to her and said simply, "Get in, before you turn to ice." Inside. The warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. Her shaking hands began to ease, and for the first time in days, she could breathe without pain. The human took the coat back gently, hanging it near the heater. He gestured to a chair by the fire. "Sit," he said. Pouring steaming tea into a metal cup, Rana sat slowly, unsure why a human stranger would care whether she froze or not. She wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers. The snow kept falling outside, covering the colony in silence. But here, in this small, warm place, the world felt different. She didn't know if she could trust him. She didn't know if this was safety or just another dangerous kindness. But for now, it was warmth, and that was all she wanted. The chair creaked under Rana as she sat close to the fire. Heat rolled over her face and arms, making the sting of returning feeling almost unbearable. Her fingers, once stiff like stone, began to tingle sharply. It was the kind of pain that meant life was coming back to them. She tightened her cloak around her shoulders. Though now the room's warmth was enough to melt the thin frost from her hair, the human moved quietly, his boots thudding on the wooden floor. He placed a steaming kettle back on the stove and brought over a metal cup filled with tea. "Careful," he said, his voice deep but not unkind. "It's hot." She nodded, wrapping her hands around the cup, letting the heat sink into her skin. The smell was strange, spicy and bitter, but it made her stomach growl in a way she couldn't hide. He noticed, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "I can make food too," he offered, already turning toward a small stove in the corner. Rena's grip on the cup tightened. "No," she said quickly. "The tea is enough." She didn't trust this kindness, not yet. In her life, generosity often came with chains. She would not let herself forget that. The man didn't argue, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment before he started chopping something on a cutting board. The rhythmic sound of the knife was strangely comforting. After a while, he spoke again, his voice casual. "Name's Daniel," he said. "Been here in this colony for too long." Rana sipped her tea, unsure if she should answer. Finally, she said softly, "Rana," and left it at that. Daniel didn't push for more. Instead, he stirred a pot on the stove, the smell of broth filling the air. Rena's eyes followed him, her instincts measuring every movement. He didn't look like a soldier, though he carried himself like someone who had been in dangerous places. His coat was patched in many places, his boots worn from long walks through snow and steel. His hands, though large and strong, moved with surprising care. "You're not from around here?" he said after a pause. Rana lowered her gaze. "No. And I won't be staying long." Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile. "We'll see about that." Her brow furrowed. Was that a threat or just human humor? She couldn't tell, and that uncertainty made her uneasy. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence outside. The wind howled against the workshop walls. Daniel finally set a bowl of hot soup in front of her. She hesitated, staring at it like it might be a trick. He noticed, leaning his elbows on the table. "It's not poisoned," he said simply. Something about the way he said it plain, without offense, made her lips twitch in a small, reluctant smile. She picked up the spoon and took a slow sip. The warmth spread through her chest, easing the knot in her stomach. She hadn't eaten something this good in months. Daniel didn't talk much as she ate, and that was a relief. Most people like to fill the air with words, but he let the silence work. When she finally put the spoon down, she felt less like a stranger in this place, though the thought scared her. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching her without judgment. "So, where's your home?" he asked quietly. The question was like a sudden drop into cold water. Rena's eyes went to the pendant around her neck, her fingers brushing it without thinking. "There is none," she said, her voice almost breaking. "Not anymore." Daniel didn't flinch or apologize. He only nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he said. He stood and poured himself tea, taking a seat across from her. "I've seen a lot of people walk into this colony with nothing," he said. "Most don't last through the winter." Rena's jaw tightened. "Then I'll be gone before it ends." His eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. "Or you'll be alive when it does." She didn't respond, afraid of what that promise might mean. The workshop was quiet for a long time after that. Rana listened to the ticking of a clock somewhere in the back room. She watched Daniel fix a small machine on the workbench, his hands steady and precise. She wondered what kind of man offered shelter to a stranger without asking why. Men like that didn't exist where she came from. Kindness was always a mask for something else. The storm outside grew worse, the wind rattling the windows. Daniel glanced toward the door, then at her. "You're staying here tonight," he said firmly. She opened her mouth to argue, but he raised a hand. "You wouldn't make it too." Streets in this cold, she hated that he was right. Still, the idea of sleeping under the same roof as a human man made her tense. But exhaustion had already settled deep into her bones. Daniel brought out a folded blanket and placed it on a small bed in the corner of the workshop. "It's not much, but it's warm," he said. Rana stayed seated by the fire, staring at the bed like it was a trap. Daniel didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care about her suspicion. He went back to his workbench without another word. She studied him quietly, the way he hummed under his breath, the way he checked the heater before settling down himself hours later. When the fire burned low, Rana finally lay down on the bed. The blanket was coarse but warm, and the hum of the workshop machines lulled her toward sleep. Her eyes drifted shut, but her mind stayed alert. She had promised herself she would never trust again, yet here she was, under a human's roof, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in years. And deep down, that frightened her more than the cold ever could. The morning light crept into the workshop through the thin curtains. Rana opened her eyes slowly, unsure for a moment where she was. The faint hum of machinery and the smell of oil reminded her. She was still in the human's workshop, wrapped in a blanket that held the faint scent of smoke and metal. The fire had burned low during the night, but the room was still warm. Daniel was already awake, his back to her as he worked on something at the bench. The clink of tools against metal echoed softly. He didn't greet her right away, and she was grateful for that. Mornings were quieter when no one demanded answers. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around her. For the first time in days, her muscles didn't ache from sleeping on cold stone. "You sleep well." Daniel's voice broke the silence. Rana hesitated, better than usual. She admitted. "Good," he said simply, not looking up from his work. The air between them was easy, but fragile, like a thin sheet of glass that could shatter with the wrong word. She kept her eyes on the floor, knowing that if she looked at him too long, she might start to believe this warmth could last. But her mind was not quiet. It drifted back against her will to the places she had tried to bury. The night her husband died was still carved into her memory, like a wound that refused to heal. They had been walking back from the market when the sirens wailed. The human border patrol and alien raiders clashed in the streets. She remembered the flash of weapons, the screams, and the sudden crushing silence when he fell. The pendant around her neck had been his. He had pressed it into her palm with the last of his strength, whispering, "Live," but living had not been the same without him. When she returned to his family, they did not see a grieving widow, they saw a curse. They told her she had brought bad luck, that her presence had doomed him. They gave her a single bag of clothes and shut their door. Forever, her hands tightened on the blanket as the memory burned in her chest. She had wandered from colony to colony, never staying long. Work was scarce for a widow, and even more scarce for one from another species. People whispered behind her back. Some men made offers she would rather die than accept. Others simply turned her away. A soft knock on the table brought her back to the present. Daniel had set a cup of tea in front of her, steam curling into the air. "Drink," he said, his tone gentle but firm. She wrapped her fingers around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her cold skin. For a moment, she almost felt safe, but safety was a dangerous illusion. "You've been on the road a while," Daniel said, watching her carefully. Rana didn't answer at first. Finally, she said, "Long enough to know no place stays safe." He nodded slowly, as if he understood, but didn't push her for details. That made her uneasy. Most people wanted to know everything about strangers who entered their space. Daniel seemed content to let her keep her walls. At least for now, her eyes wandered to the shelves along the walls. Tools hung neatly, jars of screws and bolts lined up in perfect rows. A few old photographs were pinned to a board above the workbench. One showed Daniel standing beside a woman and a little girl, both smiling. Rena's chest tightened. Recognized loss. She didn't ask about them, and he didn't offer an explanation. She finished her tea and stood, pulling her cloak around her shoulders. "I should go," she said, more to herself than to him. Daniel turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "You could," he said slowly, "but where would you end up?" She didn't answer. They both knew the truth outside these walls. The cold was waiting. "I'm not looking for charity," she said quietly. His lips curved into a faint, almost sad smile. "Then don't think of it as charity. Think of it as rent paid in chores." The words caught her off guard. He gestured toward a corner piled with dusty tools. "You keep the place clean. Maybe cook once in a while. You can stay until you figure out your next step." Her first instinct was to refuse, but the memory of frozen streets and locked doors pressed against her mind. This workshop wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in months. She hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "Fine," she said, "but I'm not staying forever." Daniel's smile was faint, but it reached his eyes this time. The day passed quietly. Rana swept the floor, dusted the shelves, and organized a few boxes of parts Daniel worked on. Repairs occasionally handing her something to hold. They didn't talk much, and that was fine with her. But every now and then, she caught him watching her not with suspicion, but as if he was trying to understand something she hadn't said. That night, as she lay under the blanket again, she traced the edges of her pendant with her fingertips. Her husband's voice echoed in her mind. Live. She wasn't sure if this counted as living, but here, in this warm corner of the cold colony, she felt the smallest spark of something she thought she had lost. And for the first time in a long while, she let herself close her eyes without fear. Rana woke to the smell of something cooking. The soft crackle of the fire mixed with the sound of metal pans being moved. For a moment, she lay still, letting the warmth sink into her bones. It felt almost dangerous to be this comfortable. She had learned the hard way that comfort often came with a cost. When she finally sat up, Daniel was at the stove. He glanced over his shoulder. "You're awake," he said simply. Rana wrapped the blanket around herself and stood, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. "What are you making?" she asked cautiously. "Breakfast," he replied, turning back to stir the pan. She hesitated by the table. Her mind whispered old warnings. No one feeds you for free. Her people had a saying, "The meal is never the gift. The debt is Daniel." Slid a plate toward her. "A piece of warm bread and eggs. Eat," he said. "You'll need strength." She sat slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her tone careful. Daniel didn't look surprised at the question. Instead, he leaned on the counter, meeting her gaze. "Help me keep the place running clean. Cook when you can. And maybe hand me tools when I'm fixing things." "That's it?" she asked, suspicion heavy in her voice. "That's it," he confirmed. Her shoulders loosened a fraction, though the doubt didn't fully leave. "Fine," she said, picking up the bread. It was soft and warm, the kind of food she hadn't tasted in a long time. As they ate in silence, she noticed something. Daniel moved like a man used to working alone, quick, efficient, but careful with his tools. He didn't waste words, and when he did speak, it was without the sharpness most people had. It made her uneasy in a different way. What kind of man asked for so little? After breakfast, she began cleaning the workshop. Dust clung to the corners. Tools were scattered in some places. Daniel worked at the bench, occasionally asking her to pass him something. It felt strange, almost peaceful, to be useful without being exploited, but that thought was dangerous, so she pushed it away. By midday, her hands were sore from scrubbing. Daniel stepped over, wiping his own hands on a rag. "You work harder than most people I've hired," he said, a hint of respect in his voice. "I'm used to working," she replied, though she didn't explain the kind of work she had been forced into before. The afternoon passed quietly until a knock echoed at the door. Daniel frowned, wiping the grease from his fingers. "Stay here," he said, before crossing to open it. Rena's instincts sharpened. She stayed near the workbench, her eyes on the door. When it opened, the cold air rushed in, along with two tall figures. They were alien men, broad-shouldered, with skin marked in the patterns of her homeworld. Her stomach dropped. She knew them. They had been part of her husband's extended family, the same ones who had cast her out. One of them sneered, his gaze sliding past Daniel to find her. Well, look who we found," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Daniel stepped slightly to the side, blocking their full view of her. "You have business here?" he asked, his tone steady but cold. The taller man smirked. "She owes debts, family debts." Rena's heart pounded. "I owe you nothing," she said sharply. The man's eyes narrowed. "You owe for his burial, for the shame you brought, and for running away." Daniel's posture didn't change, but his presence filled the doorway like a wall. "She's under my roof now," he said, his voice low. "You want her, you go through me." The shorter alien laughed. "You think? We're afraid of a human mechanic." Daniel didn't move. "Try me," he said simply, for a tense moment. The cold wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the taller man spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he growled. Turning away, the other followed, their footsteps crunching in the snow until they disappeared. Daniel shut the door, locking it with a firm twist. He turned to Rana. "You know them," he said, more a statement than a question. Rena's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "They never leave anything unfinished." Daniel met her gaze. "Then we'll be ready." His calm confidence startled her. He wasn't bluffing. But she couldn't understand why a human who barely knew her would risk trouble for her sake. That night, the air in the workshop felt heavier. Rana couldn't shake the image of those men standing in the doorway. Every sound outside made her flinch. Daniel noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he checked the locks twice and moved the heater closer to her bed. "You're safe here," he said quietly before going to his own corner of the workshop. She lay awake long after he had gone still. The warmth of the blanket did little to ease the cold inside her chest. Her life had taught her that every shelter had a price. But here, the only price Daniel had named was her help. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the real cost came due. Snow had stopped falling, but the streets outside the workshop were still white and silent. The calm felt wrong to Rana, as if the storm had only moved somewhere out of sight. She sat by the small fire, mending a torn cloth with careful stitches. Every so often, her eyes drifted toward the door Daniel had left early that morning to pick up parts from a supply depot. Promising to return before dark, the quiet was heavy, broken only by the soft tick of the workshop's wall clock. She tried to focus on her sewing, but her mind kept replaying the faces of the two alien men. Their sneers, their voices full of the same cruelty she thought she had escaped. They would come back, she knew it, and when they did, they wouldn't just knock politely. By late afternoon, the light outside began to fade. Rana stood to light the lamps inside, the warm glow chasing away some of the shadows. She was placing the kettle on the stove when she heard its footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching over the snow. Her hands froze mid-motion, her breath catching in her throat. A knock sounded 3 sharp raps against the door. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't Daniel's knock. She backed away from the door, every instinct telling her to stay silent. But the knocking came again, louder this time, followed by a voice she recognized. "Rana, we know you're in there," the taller alien called out. She gripped the edge of the workbench, her knuckles white. "Open the door, little widow," the other one said with a mocking laugh. "Let's talk about what you owe us." Her heart pounded so hard she thought they might hear it through the door. She didn't answer, hoping they would leave, but instead, she heard the sound of a hand testing the door handle. The lock rattled. "We can wait all night," a taller one warned, his tone turning cold. Rana looked toward the back of the workshop. There was a small exit there, but if she ran now, she'd be out in the open. And Daniel wasn't here to stop them this time. They began pounding on the door, each hit making the wood groan. Her breathing grew shallow. She remembered the last time she had been cornered by them. Her voice silenced, her body used to carry burdens she never asked for. No, she thought fiercely. Not again. She scanned the room for something to defend herself with, spotting a heavy wrench on the table just as the pounding grew louder. A new sound cut through the air, the deep rumble of an engine approaching fast. The pounding stopped, replaced by muttered curses. Moments later, the workshop door swung open and Daniel stepped inside, his eyes instantly scanning the room. Behind him, the two aliens lingered a few steps back, their expressions dark. Daniel's voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "You two have short memories," he said. Stepping fully inside and closing the door behind him, the taller alien smirked. "We just came to collect what's ours. She's not yours," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. "And she's not leaving with you." The shorter alien stepped forward, but Daniel didn't move. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, compact tool. At first glance, it looked harmless, but when he pressed a button, sharp electric crack filled the air. "Walk away," Daniel said simply. The taller one's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake. Human." Daniel's reply was steady. "Maybe, but it's mine to make." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the two aliens stepped back, the taller one pointing a finger at Rana. "This isn't over," he said, his voice dripping with promise. They turned and walked away into the snowy night, their footsteps fading into the distance. Daniel didn't relax until he could no longer hear them. He turned to Rana, his gaze sharp. "Did they try to get in?" he asked. She nodded, her voice shaky. "They would have, if you hadn't come back." Daniel walked over to the door, checking the lock, then added a second bolt from a drawer. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "But next time, we'll tea. Be ready." Rana sank into the chair by the fire, the wrench still clutched in her hand. Daniel noticed and gave a small nod. "Good, you were ready to fight." She let out a shaky breath. "I've been running so long. I don't know if I can stop." "You can," Daniel said. "But you'll need to stand your ground and you won't be doing it alone." Something in his tone made her believe him, even though believing was dangerous. Outside, the night deepened. snow beginning to fall again. Inside, the fire burned brighter. The shadows pushed back, but in the corners of her mind, the memory of those men's eyes still lingered. They were not gone. They were only waiting. And when they came again, the fight would not be so simple. The night after the confrontation was restless. Rana lay under the blanket, staring at the dim glow of the heater across the room. Every creak of the workshop made her tense. She kept replaying the scene at the door of the cold eyes of the men from her past. Daniel's steady voice, the way they had left but promised to return. Sleep came in short bursts, broken by the fear that they would come back before morning. When dawn finally came, the world outside was still covered in white. Daniel was already awake, tightening a latch on one of the windows. He looked at her and spoke like he had been waiting. "They'll try again," he said, his tone calm but certain. Rana pulled the blanket tighter around her. "Then I should leave before they do." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You walk out that door alone, you won't last the day." "I've lasted longer," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. He set his tools down and leaned against the wall, watching her. "Lasting isn't the same as living," he said quietly. The words made her look away, her jaw tightening. She had run from many places before. Running was survival. But for the first time, she found herself hesitating. It wasn't just the warmth of the workshop or the food it was the way Daniel had stood between her and danger without asking for anything. That kind of protection was rare, and rare things were dangerous to need. As she cleaned the workbench later that morning, her eyes fell on Daniel's photos again, the woman and little girl smiling beside him. She wondered who they were, and if they were the reason Daniel understood loss. But she didn't ask. She knew what it was like to have parts of your life that belonged only to you. Daniel, for his part, didn't volunteer the story. By midday, Daniel began repairing a broken generator someone had left with him. He handed her tools without looking, as if they had been working together for years. "You're good with your hands," he remarked. "I had to be," she said. "No one hires you if you can't prove you're useful." He gave a small nod, the closest thing to approval she'd seen from him. But the quiet didn't last. When the afternoon light began to fade, Daniel spoke again. "You're staying here," he said, not as a question, but a statement. Rana frowned. "You don't get to decide that." "You're right," he admitted. "But you should decide it. Decide now." The way he said it made her pause. Her instinct was to say no, to keep moving before she became attached, but something in his eyes told her he wasn't asking because he needed her. He was asking because he didn't want her to face the next storm alone. She thought of the cold streets, the closed doors, the way her fingers had nearly frozen before she met him. If she left, there was no guarantee she'd find another shelter. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do you care if I stay or go?" Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and met her gaze. "Because I've seen too many people walk away from safety, thinking they could make it alone," he said, "and I've buried more than I care to count." His voice was steady, but there was a shadow behind its grief that matched her own. The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, the snow began falling again, small flakes drifting past the windows. Rana looked at the fire, its flames steady and warm. She imagined herself walking into the white emptiness outside. Then she imagined those men finding her without Daniel there. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet. "I'll stay at least until they stop looking for me." Daniel's expression didn't change much, but she thought she saw relief in his eyes. "Then we prepare," he said, turning back to his workbench. "Prepare for what?" she asked. "For when they come back, and they will," he replied. That evening, Daniel showed her how to lock the doors and bolt the windows. He gave her a small metal rod that could be used to bar the back exit. "This place might not look like much," he said, but with the right hands, it can hold. Rana practiced moving through the workshop, checking the locks, memorizing where everything was. It felt strange. She wasn't just hiding now, she was defending something. When the fire was burning low, she sat in her bed corner, holding her husband's pendant. The faint light inside it flickered softly. She whispered into the quiet, "I'm not running this time." The words felt heavier than she expected. Maybe this was what choosing to stay really meant, not because it was safe, but because it was worth fighting for. Daniel glanced at her from his chair by the fire. "You'll be fine," he said. Almost like a promise. She didn't answer. But for the first time, she almost believed him. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the tracks of the men who had been there before. But she knew the past didn't vanish, that easily it always found its way back. And when it did, she would be ready. The night was quiet. But Rana could feel it, the kind of silence that wasn't peace. But warning, she sat near the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Daniel was at the workbench, checking a small electric device for the third time. They hadn't spoken much all day, both aware that the moment they'd been preparing for was close. The two men from her past had vanished for days, but neither of them believed it meant they were gone. Outside, the snow fell in slow, heavy flakes. Every creak of the workshop's walls made Rana glance toward the door. Her pendant felt cold against her skin, as if it knew trouble was near. Daniel noticed her tension and spoke without looking up. "When they come, don't try to run, stand behind me." She swallowed. "I can fight, I know," he said simply. "But I fight better when I know you're safe." The words warmed her more than the fire. Though she didn't say it aloud, she wondered if anyone had ever spoken to her like that, not as a burden, but as someone worth protecting. Hours passed until the clock struck midnight. That's when the sound came, faint footsteps crunching in the snow. Not from one direction, but two. Daniel's head lifted, his hand going to the tool on the bench. Rena's grip tightened on the metal rod he had given her. A knock came, not sharp like before, but slow, deliberate. Then the voice she dreaded. "Rana, open the door." Daniel moved to the entrance, his voice calm. "You should have stayed gone." The taller alien laughed. "We've decided to finish this." More footsteps sounded outside. There were more of them this time. Daniel threw the first lock, keeping the second in place. "You still have time to walk away," he said, his voice like stone. "We're not leaving without her," came the reply. The next moment, a heavy thud hit the door, shaking it on its hinges. Daniel stepped back, motioning for Rana to stay behind the workbench. The second blow cracked the wood near the lock. Daniel moved fast, flipping a hidden latch that sent a metal bar into place. The third hit didn't break through, but the sound of splintering made it clear they would, if given time. "Back door," Daniel said quickly. Rana shook her head. "If we run, they'll just keep coming." Something in her voice made him pause. She stepped forward, standing beside him. "I'm not leaving you here to fight alone," she said. Daniel gave her a brief, unreadable look, then nodded once. "Then we hold," he said. Picking up the electric tool, it sparked with a sharp crack. The next impact shattered the lock, the door swinging open to reveal the two men and three more behind them. Cold air rushed in, but neither Daniel nor Rana moved back. The taller alien smirked. "Step aside, human." Daniel's reply was a low growl. "Not a chance." The first man lunged, but Daniel's strike with the electric tool sent him stumbling back with a shout. Another tried to push past, only for Rana to swing the metal rod into his side. The sound of pain filled the workshop, but the others kept coming. It was chaos. Blows landing, boots scraping on the floor, the firelight flickering across moving shadows. One of the men grabbed Rena's arm, trying to drag her toward the door. Her pendant slipped from her cloak, the glow catching his eye. "That's his," the man snarled. "It belongs to the family." "It belongs to me," Rana snapped, twisting free and driving the rod into his leg. He cried out, stumbling back into the snow outside. Daniel fought like a man who had no room for losing. Every strike was precise, every movement steady. The taller alien managed to grab his coat, but Daniel shoved him into the wall with a force that rattled the tools hanging there. "You don't get to touch what's mine," Daniel said, his voice quiet but deadly. One by one, the intruders fell back. They weren't used to being resisted, especially not by a human and a widow they thought was too weak to stand. The cold night air filled with the sound of retreating footsteps. The taller alien glared at them from the snow, his breath visible. In the freezing air, "This isn't over," he spat. But his voice lacked the confidence it once held. Daniel slammed the door shut, locking it again. The firelight seemed warmer now, the air inside heavy with the scent of smoke and adrenaline. Rena's chest rose and fell quickly. Her hands still gripping the metal rod, Daniel looked at her and said simply, "Told you we'd be ready." She managed a small, tired smile. "You were right." She walked to the fire and sat down. The heat chasing away the last chill of the night. Daniel joined her, sitting in the chair across from her. For a long moment, they didn't speak. Then Rana reached for her pendant, holding it in her palm. "I used to think warmth was just a fire or a blanket," she said softly. "But it's not tits this." This feeling, Daniel's gaze stayed on her. "And you've got it now," he said. She met his eyes and nodded. "No home wanted me." "But you did." He gave a faint smile. "And you're not leaving." Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the tracks of those who had tried to take her. Inside, the workshop was quiet, warm, and for the first time in years home.